One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslik.
Welcome to One Step Ahead Radio, another session, another week. James and I are here to take you through some of the news and updates around the world. There have been some rather tricky developments, including different wars happening breakfast, lunch, and supper every week. But we will try to bring you some of the news related to the state of the planet, sustainability, what companies are doing. And James, I think this week we have something that's a bit more positive. Don't you agree? Yeah?
Yeah, we're always on the lookout for something positive. Hello, Sasja. Good to be back here again. And yes, it was difficult to do this digest of where the world's going and having things that are going in the right direction and in terms of sustainability.
We'll try to do better this week, and we try to bring you some positive spin on things, both in investment space, but also what companies are doing. But before going into that, James, it seems that we are just a couple of years away from having ability to sort of stop warming more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. I mean, there has been new research coming out indicating to us, citizens of this planet, that we have a serious problem to tackle. However, it seems to be that this kind of news does not have any airtime anywhere. I mean, it's sort of buried down somewhere deep down in these climate-specific sites. What's your take on that?
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's also because, climate change and these data is so slow-moving in a certain way, so inexorable, that I think, there's a certain sense within journalism that it's not kind of new news, and that people sort of filter it out. And so we write it because we have to write it, and which is an enormous tragedy, because 10 years ago, it's 10 years this year since the Paris Agreement. And, at the time, we were celebrating this ambition to, try and at least reach 1.5 degrees limiting. But everybody knew that was based on a certain amount, there's a carbon budget. There's only a certain amount of tons of CO2 that you can put into the air. So if every year we just keep on business as usual and putting the same amount of carbon into the atmosphere, we all know where that's going to go. So it's kind of like we could have written this story a few years ago. But as I say, as you were saying, there's just so much. There's so much other news and conflict and deals and negotiations. It seems to be this sort of. It's strange. It's like there's every twist and turn of every time Donald Trump says something might happen, maybe happen. It sort of dominates. He has he's a brilliant communicator in that sense, and everyone's hanging on his every word and what he might or might do, and nobody knows what I'm going to do. Whereas we have this kind of ticking time bomb, that isn't news. So
it's unbelievable. Flooding the space, it seems to be the strategy that works, at least in the context of media. But James, I mean, any reflections from your side in terms of what you have observed over the last week or two?
Yeah, no. In terms of this and this article and where we're going in terms of climate change, I was listening to a webinar just yesterday with Georg Kell, who was the former executive director of the Global Compact, UN Global Compact. And, he was spinning a positive spin that I've heard from quite a few quarters recently in terms of business will respond to long-term price signals. And kind of the way you frame it as well is, the market will give the signals. We can't expect regulation or rules, being in Europe and there's this big hoo-ha about CSRD and omnibus. It's going to be how the market sends signals to business that they have to adapt and change, and they have that long-term horizon. And I think under the surface of all of the sort of green hushing at the moment, there is that awareness. There's a very, very strong awareness of what it means, and the canary in the mine of being the rise in insurance premiums linked to the physical impact of climate change. And I'm sure this in the coming weeks we will have, unfortunately, reason to comment on that. I'm sure there will be events this summer about tragedies and suffering because of that. And I think we need to recognise that beyond the sort of the high level rhetoric, that business is going to pay attention to that because they see that in their long-term planning and investments, what's going to make sense, what's not going to make sense. So I sort of getting that vibe quite often, and I heard it very explicitly yesterday, as I said.
I mean, James, I completely agree with you. But the fact is, if you're looking at the reality of the business, I'm, just following some of the news updates across Europe, and apparently there is an amber heat alert issued across England with warning on of rising deaths. Basically, I think it's a meteorological or health organization in the UK, England, warns, basically they're warning the risk for people age 65 and over that the temperatures about 33 degrees Celsius will stay until Monday and will have significant impact on the health of the people. I mean, look, for companies in Europe not basically developed to operate the business under this kind of heat, it's going to cause a lot of cost. So, I mean, as you say, whatever we think about it, it's going to sort of a flip back to business in terms of they will need to adapt and they will need to address this. I mean, in principle, there is no way out. I mean, that's how I see it.
Yeah, very much. That's very much the sensation, and I think the way we'll see things are going to go in the meantime.
Yeah. Any more sort of thoughts from your side? Any reflection? Anything that you have seen that we could share with the audience in terms of happenings over the last week?
Yeah, I wanted to just touch back to I think it was last week we were talking about oceans, and you'd picked up on the story about the increase in the ocean heat. I think people should scroll back, I think about a week, I think it was the end of last week, that there was the closing of the big conference in Nice in the south of France about protecting the oceans, and that was quite seen generally. It was a UN Ocean Summit that ended, and it was kind of seen as a sort of a defining moment for the ocean. Although there's always criticism, there's always people who say it's not enough, but the sense this sentiment being shared, people finally waking up to the reality of serious decline of something that makes up for 70% of the Earth's surface, and co-hosted by Emmanuel Macron. We've never seen so many heads of state and government meeting to discuss the seas. So convening 60 world leaders, 3 times as many as attended the second UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon in 2022. So there was a certain amount, I saw comments from Greenpeace USA saying, well, we're actually quite positively surprised by this meeting. And I think that perhaps gives us some encouragement as we look forward to COP30, is it?
Yes.
In Berlin, in Brazil, in terms of what the multilateral system is going to do. So I wanted to sort of like loop back on the oceans front, because that was something that we'd raised before and again, is kind of seeing the glass half full, I think. Yeah. I don't know if you had any glass half full stories on your side.
Yes, I mean there are plenty of them, but I'm trying to understand the reaction of the banks. I mean, look, working in the finance industry as I do, understanding sort of the dynamics of it, and also understanding the fact that all of us are in one or another way, attached to it, financial industry, to this pension savings, investments, and other things. We all participate in this global lottery. And the fact is, if you're looking at the way how the banks react to this, I mean, there has been a report coming out that banks boosted fossil fuel finance by more than a fifth in 2024. And US banks and Barclays basically each increased sector lending and underwriting by more than 10 billion. That's quite a lot of money. And it goes along with the fact that I don't know if you remember, that was discussed actually at the Paris climate sort of agreement meeting. There was this big pledge to de-coal the economy, or basically get hooked off the coal going forward. However, I mean, if you're looking at it in the numbers, the Western countries have been doing decoupling the economies, but India, Indonesia, and China actually leading that, are just continuing to use coal power and building new coal power plants in order to support, the population in the way how they can, through the means of using coal as a main energy source. But going back to banks, James, I mean, this is quite worrying because it actually means that we are investing again more money in something that is not really going to solve it, but rather create a bit more challenges for us going forward. And my sort of a plea to people listening to this is that try to really understand how your money is managed and where your pension savings are, because you can make a difference just by asking sometimes questions.
That's absolutely fundamental. Yes, it's a reversal of the trend, which is really surprising in terms of fossil fuel finance from the banks coming down in the last few years, and then in 2024 ticking back up quite significantly. So funnily enough, in the same story, it's kind of like banks are doing everything. They're doing business basically. They're keeping on dancing the dance, because in the same thing it says, we also invest billions in the energy transition and renewables and everything. So it's kind of like piling everything on, and obviously one doesn't sort of like compensate the other, because these are things that are going to be locked into our economic system for years, if not decades. So very much important in terms of your impact of where your money goes. I think everyone has a role to play in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a Norwegian syndrome. It's quite well known around the world. Now, Norway being a country that has, most Tesla cars, and it's fairly renewable in its own territory, but exporting and increasing export of oil and gas across the world, basically giving a lot of money to the peacekeeping things around the world, and at the same time producing a lot of oil and gas that eventually creates type of problems that peacekeeping forces and humanitarian organizations around the world would need to address going forward. So it's a bit of a Norwegian sort of a syndrome we see everywhere in this context. But James, I mean, you remember this Spanish blackout, which was, on the headlines for a couple of days at least, some time ago, and some of the criticism regarding renewable energy. Do you know anything more about that one?
Well, it was at the end of April when the whole Iberian Peninsula suffered this more or less a day-long blackout, and I wanted to bring it up again because this past few days the Spanish minister has been presenting the results of their investigation and their analysis that we've done. And one headline that struck me, because at the time it was just so many fingers pointing at solar and renewables, because there was Spain has invested heavily in solar particularly, and the penetration into the grid when it happened was particularly high. And so it was an opportunity for a lot of fossil fuel lobbying and people who wanted to bash renewables to say, well, it was all because we have too much solar and it's unstable and it's not secure and we can't, and it fed into that narrative. I think a lot of people picked up on that. And basically the solar industry, I think, is smiling because the government investigation blamed everybody else for failings in terms of what happened. If you want to look into it, you need like a PhD in electricity grid management, because it's very complicated. But it was a combination, they said, of bad planning, errors at power plants, and particularly big energy utilities and the grid operator in terms of failing. So that was the findings from the energy and environmental minister, which I think everyone should read. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how many people read it. They just hear the kind of, there's been a blackout and it's because there's so much solar. And unfortunately, when it comes around to actually detailing what actually did happen, people kind of switched off, and it ends up being rather technical.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that there is a lot of misinformation around this, and of course a lot of conspiracy theories. But it's nice that we got some internal investigation that is disclosing more facts that people can actually take in, and at least to some extent balance out what they've probably heard on some of the social media platforms with a lot of different theories instead of facts. Now, if we try to sort of dwell a bit into the positive things, and James, Microsoft is a huge company, and they have been basically committing to to become a carbon negative by 2030 by removing all of their historical emissions from the atmosphere by 2050. But the fact is that companies' artificial intelligence investments have made these targets very hard to hit, and by a lot. And today, Microsoft's total planet warming impact is 23% higher than it was in 2020. And it's partly because of its vast expansion of emission-intensive data centers, according to the sustainability report. But they are not going to stop. They are going to continue, and they are investing heavily in decarbonization across the world. And they are basically steering a record carbon removal purchases this year, including 3.7 million metric ton deal with CO280, a startup that captures CO2 emissions from pulp and paper mills. This is a fantastic that they are continuing, despite the fact that Microsoft is, of course, I guess, on the radar of American authorities as well. Don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Microsoft, along with a lot of other major American technology and other firms, been leading the way for a while in terms of investing in carbon offsetting and this in particular in carbon removal purchases. And it's really critical that these big players move and show the market direction and put down their dollars, as it were, because at the same time, the intervention from the Trump administration and from Congress at the moment is taking away a lot of state funding from these startups, because this is very sort of nascent technology, and so it's a very important signal, I think, to the wider market that's important to have. Obviously, sort of like it's backpedaling a bit because their emissions are just like going through the roof, as you were mentioning before. So they're fighting. They're fighting the tide coming back to them inexorably. But I think in terms of getting those markets going and giving the signals to these businesses that they can invest, and they know that